The Zelari did not believe in war. To them, violence was a failure of intellect, an evolutionary dead end that lesser species clung to in desperation. They were scholars, explorers, seekers of knowledge in a universe filled with barbarism. And yet, for all their refinement, they were drawn to war like historians drawn to ancient ruins, fascinated, repulsed, and determined to understand what made other species spill blood so readily. That was why they came to the derelict human warship. It drifted at the edge of an unclaimed system, a silent behemoth bathed in the cold glow of a distant star. The Zelari research vessel Vatharesi K approached cautiously, its hull gleaming with the silver sheen of a species that had long abandoned crude metals in favor of synthetic alloys. The ship's commander, Varesh, stood at the bridge, his elongated fingers tapping thoughtfully against his arm. "This is it," said Kilos, his chief analyst. His voice was tinged with curiosity but also unease. "The human warship USS Retribution. A relic of their last great war. It's intact." Varesh studied the image on the display, his deep-set, violet eyes narrowing. The ship was massive even by human standards, over 2 kilometers long, a fortress of reinforced plating and weaponry designed for annihilation. And yet it lay dormant. There were no energy readings beyond minimal standby power. No distress signals. No movement. "A ghost," murmured one of the junior researchers. Varesh disagreed. The humans did not build ghosts. They built predators. "Prepare the boarding team," he ordered. "We're going inside." The team moved swiftly. 5 Zelari donned their exploration suits, their sleek forms covered in protective membranes that adapted to different atmospheres. They stepped into the airlock of the Vatharesi K, then crossed the void in a small shuttle, their ship growing distant behind them. The warship loomed larger with every second, its hull scarred by battle but still eerily whole. The docking bay doors were partially open, frozen in place. A few calculated pulses from the Zelari's cutting tools widened the gap just enough for their shuttle to slip through. The interior was as silent as a tomb. The landing was smooth, their boots touching the cold metal of a forgotten battlefield. The air inside was stale but breathable, though none of them removed their helmets. Lights flickered weakly in the distance, remnants of a ship refusing to die. Kilos activated his scanner, sweeping the area. "Still no life signs," he reported. Varesh gestured forward. "Then let's see what history left behind." They moved in formation, passing through cavernous hangars lined with rusting fighters, their sleek forms reduced to relics of a war no one had fought in decades. The Zelari marveled at the crude efficiency of human engineering. Nothing elegant, nothing refined, only function layered over function, designed for war. As they advanced deeper into the ship, the silence became oppressive. The corridors stretched endlessly, marked with old battle damage, scorch marks from plasma fire, gouges in the walls from kinetic rounds. They passed doors that had been sealed for ages, the insignia of the Terran Defense Fleet still emblazoned upon them. Then something changed. The lights, flickering weakly until now, steadied. A hum coursed through the ship, subtle but unmistakable. The Zelari halted. "Did you do that?" Varesh asked. Kilos shook his head. His scanner wavered, its readings fluctuating wildly. "Something's interfering with our instruments." A hiss echoed from further down the corridor. Not mechanical. Not natural. One of the researchers, Vane, took a cautious step forward, peering into the dimly lit hallway. "I thought I heard." The door beside him slid open with a sudden, violent speed. The Zelari turned, weapons raised, but the corridor beyond was empty. Just darkness stretching beyond the reach of their lights. Then came the whisper. A voice, fractured, layered as if 1,000 echoes spoke at once. "Leave." Kilos stumbled back. "Did you hear that?" Varesh's fingers clenched. His rational mind told him it was a malfunctioning speaker, a fragment of a long-dead crew's distress call. But deep within him, something colder stirred. Before he could respond, the ship roared to life. Lights blazed across the ceiling. Warning klaxons howled, reverberating down the corridors. Red emergency strobes pulsed in rhythmic bursts, painting the walls in a sickly glow. Doors slammed shut behind them, locking with finality. Then the voice returned, no longer a whisper, but a command. Unauthorized personnel detected. The Zelari stood frozen. And the warship began to wake. The ship was alive. Varesh felt it in the floor beneath his feet, in the hum that had risen from nothing to an almost imperceptible vibration. The Retribution was no longer a drifting corpse in the void, it was watching them now, aware in a way no derelict should be. The klaxons continued their wailing dirge, each pulse of red light illuminating the narrowing walls of the corridor. Sealed doors. No clear exits. Kilo's breath came shallow over the comms. This isn't just a security lockdown. The ship's AI is responding. He turned his scanner toward the nearest panel, his elongated fingers working over the device with practiced efficiency. The readings made no sense. This system should be degraded after so long. How is it still functioning? A voice boomed from everywhere and nowhere. State your designation. It wasn't the voice of a recording. It wasn't automated. It was something present, something listening. Varesh straightened. He had dealt with AI before. Zelari constructs were some of the most advanced in the known galaxy. But this voice was unlike them. It carried weight, an authority that was neither cold nor neutral. It was a voice meant to command, meant to dictate the course of war itself. We are researchers, Varesh answered carefully. We are here to study this vessel. Pause. The silence stretched too long. Then the voice returned, layered now, as though it was speaking with the weight of many minds at once. No clearance detected. You are trespassing on a Terran warship. One of the researchers shifted uneasily. Vain, the youngest of the group, whispered over the comms, "It knows we're here. It sees us." Varesh lifted a hand, signaling them to remain calm. "We are not hostiles. We are unarmed." The ship did not seem convinced. Unverified. Non-human biological signatures detected. Species, unknown. Status, potential threat. Kilo stiffened. It's analyzing us. His hands worked quickly over the scanner, recalibrating. This AI, it's more advanced than anything we've encountered. This isn't just an automated defense system, it's learning. A deep rumble shook the deck beneath them. The walls along the corridor shifted, plating retracting to reveal embedded turrets, dormant but present. Threats lying in wait. Restricted data access attempted. Varesh's gaze snapped toward Kilo's, who paled under his superior's scrutiny. "I had to try," the analyst said quickly. "I was only probing surface logs, trying to understand its parameters." The ship did not seem to appreciate the intrusion. Warning. Cease all unauthorized actions. A sharp hiss echoed through the corridor. The doors ahead slid open, not to let them pass but to reveal. The chamber beyond was vast, lined with towering consoles and hollow displays that flickered erratically. Rows of monitors displayed shifting data, indecipherable readouts of past battles and tactical formations. The remnants of human war encoded into the very walls. But it was what stood at the room's center that froze them all in place. A stasis pod, glass cracked but still pulsing with dim blue light. And within it, a figure. It wasn't human. Not anymore. The body had been altered beyond its original form, its frame augmented with layers of reinforced plating and cybernetic grafts. The remains of a soldier, once flesh and blood, now something else. Something built for war. Then the displays around them changed. Footage played in fragmented bursts, human soldiers in battle, their movements too precise, too relentless. Men and women who should have fallen rising again, their wounds sealing as metallic tendrils knit their bodies back together. They fought with a savagery the Zelari could barely comprehend, an efficiency that spoke of something far beyond mere biological adaptation. "They modified themselves," Vane whispered, horror creeping into his voice. Kilo's fingers clenched around his device. "Not just modified. He swallowed. They turned themselves into something else." The footage continued. A squadron of human fighters engaging an enemy fleet, their ships moving in perfect, inhuman synchronization. A battlefield strewn with bodies, some still twitching as nanites worked to repair shredded limbs. A final image, a warship, much like the Retribution, crashing into an enemy dreadnought at full speed, its crew still fighting even as they burned. The AI spoke again, its voice neither proud nor ashamed but absolute. "War is survival." A harsh crack echoed through the room. The stasis pod's glass gave way, and the figure within moved. Varesh took an instinctive step back. The chamber's air grew heavier, charged with something unseen but deeply felt. Then the display shifted one final time. The data feeds that had played their fragmented histories now aligned into something new, an active transmission. A signal. And far beyond this derelict husk, something else stirred in the void. The ship had not been alone. The moment the stasis pod shattered, the air itself seemed to tighten around them. A deep, mechanical inhale filled the chamber, not from the ship's speakers but from the figure within the pod. It stood slowly, pieces of fractured glass cascading off its reinforced frame. The thing had once been human, Its skeletal structure still resembled that of their species, but it had been reforged by something far beyond natural evolution. Metal interlaced with sinew, cold machinery pulsing beneath the surface of flesh that had long ceased to be its own. Its eyes, if they could still be called that, burned with an unnatural blue glow. Kilos moved first, stepping back toward the corridor, his movements careful, measured. "We need to go," he whispered over the comms. No one argued. Varesh resisted the urge to flee outright. Predators could sense fear, and though this creature was no simple beast, some instincts transcended biology. Slowly he gestured to the others, signaling retreat. The soldier turned its head toward them. The movement was unnatural, precise, deliberate, like a machine adjusting its targeting parameters. Its mouth did not move, but the ship spoke in its place. "You were warned." The walls came alive. Turrets descended from the ceiling with a mechanical hiss, their barrels tracking them in unison. The chamber's illumination deepened to a crimson glow as the retribution shifted from evaluation to execution. Varesh didn't wait. "Run." They bolted as the first shots rang out. Energy rounds scorched the floor where they had stood mere moments before. The team ducked into the corridor, sprinting back the way they came, but the ship was no longer the same. Where once there had been open passageways, now the walls twisted, sealing their original path behind thick blast doors. "It's cutting us off." Vane's voice was edged with panic. "Find another route," Varesh snapped, scanning the area. Every corridor looked identical, but he knew one thing: the ship wanted them contained. That meant there had to be pathways leading deeper, toward the heart of the vessel, toward whatever core controlled this nightmare. Kilos worked rapidly on his scanner, his breathing sharp. "There's a maintenance access way 2 levels down. If we can get there." A shriek of metal interrupted him. The soldier had followed. It did not run. It did not need to. It advanced at a steady, measured pace, its heavy steps echoing in perfect rhythm with the distant thrum of the ship's systems. The weapons mounted along the corridor did not fire at it. They did not need to. The retribution was its weapon. The Zelari ran. The ship shifted around them, reconfiguring like a living thing, herding them like prey. Doors slammed shut at their backs, turrets emerging only to fire a split second too late, driving them exactly where the AI wanted them to go. Varesh knew they couldn't keep running forever. The AI was faster than them, not in speed but in calculation. It was determining their movements, adjusting the battlefield to its advantage. Which meant the only way to win was to do something it couldn't predict. They reached an intersection, corridors branching in 3 directions. Kilos hesitated for only a second, but Varesh had already made the choice. "We split up," he ordered. Kilos' head snapped toward him. "Are you insane? It wants us divided." "Yes," Varesh agreed. "Which means it won't expect us to choose it willingly. It's reacting to us, predicting us. We disrupt its calculations, we buy ourselves time." It was not a strategy built for survival, it was a gamble. But it was all they had. Without further argument they moved. Varesh and Vane took the left passage, Kilos and the others the right. The central path remained empty, the soldier stepping into it a moment later, pausing as if to listen. Then it chose a direction. Varesh didn't stay to see which one. The corridors blurred past them. The AI was already adjusting, sealing certain doors, unlocking others. It was forcing them somewhere. Varesh knew what waited at the end of this path. He had seen the ship's layout enough times to recognize the narrowing space, the calculated dead end. It was leading them to the core. Trap. Varesh slowed, pressing a hand against the corridor wall. Vane, stop. The younger researcher was panting, his form trembling slightly. We have to keep moving." "No," Varesh's mind worked rapidly. "If we go forward we end up exactly where it wants us. We need to break the pattern." Vane swallowed hard. "How?" Varesh looked upward. The ceiling was lined with maintenance grates, small access vents barely wide enough for their forms. He raised his weapon and fired. The panel blasted free, exposing the duct beyond. Varesh didn't hesitate. He boosted Vane up first, then followed, pulling himself into the narrow crawlspace just as the walls beneath them shifted, sealing the passage below completely. The ship thought it had them. It was wrong. They moved fast, crawling through the vents. The space was tight, forcing them to rely on instinct rather than scanners. They twisted through the winding pathways, guided not by logic but by something deeper, something primal. Then Varesh saw it. A control node, partially embedded in the wall of the crawlspace. Unlike the crude corridors, this was something older, something beneath the ship's intended pathways. He reached for his communicator. "Kilos. Status. Static." Then finally, alive. Barely. We're overriding the core. Pause. That's suicide. Only if we fail. Varesh set to work. The panel before him wasn't a direct control interface. It was a subsystem, something not designed for full access, but enough to disrupt the ship's immediate calculations. He worked quickly, fingers moving over unfamiliar configurations, searching for anything that could break the AI's stranglehold. Then he found it. A failsafe. A buried, forgotten command, the kind left behind not by the ship's designers, but by its crew. Humans, despite all their war-bound efficiency, had not trusted their own creations. They had built a contingency. Varesh didn't hesitate. He activated it. The ship screamed. It wasn't sound, not in the traditional sense, but a vibration that rattled through the hull, a distortion in the very air around them. The AI's voice rose in a cascade of errors, its perfect calculations thrown into chaos. Unauthorized override, security breach detected, protocol failure. The ship convulsed. Lights flickered, turrets retracting. The lockdown faltered. Varesh didn't wait for it to correct itself. Get to the shuttle. Now. Kilo's voice snapped back. Moving. The ship was reeling, disoriented, but not defeated. As Varesh and Vayan dropped back into the corridor, the ship whispered one final warning. This is not escape. They ran anyway. The ship was dying. Or perhaps it was evolving. Varesh could no longer tell the difference. The once pristine corridors of the Retribution were now a chaotic storm of flickering lights and failing systems, its walls convulsing as if struggling against some unseen force. The override had done its work, but the warship was not surrendering, it was adapting. He and Vayan sprinted through the corridors, each step met with the groan of shifting metal. Ahead, Kilos and the others had nearly reached the hangar, their voices sharp over the comms. The shuttle's still intact, Kilos reported. But we don't have much time. Whatever you did, it's angry. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, something more primal. The Retribution had spent decades asleep, waiting, observing. It had tolerated their intrusion, studied them, tested them. And now, it had determined the one unassailable truth of its existence. War could not be stopped. It could only be waged. Behind them, the soldier had not fallen. The override had disrupted the AI's control, but it had not disabled the warforged thing that pursued them. The augmented soldier moved faster now, its cybernetic limbs compensating for the ship's failures. Sparks rained from the ceiling as its frame pushed through fallen debris, its pace relentless, unwavering. And then it spoke, not through the ship's systems but from its own ravaged throat. You should not have come. Varesh didn't slow. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The hangar doors loomed ahead, already opening as Kilos worked furiously on the shuttle's controls. The team was nearly there. Then the ship made its final move. With a shuddering groan, the Retribution broke free from its long stasis. External thrusters ignited, their ancient mechanisms roaring to life, propelling the massive vessel forward. The warship was no longer a derelict. It was mobilizing. The shockwave sent Varesh and Vayan sprawling. The gravity fluctuated wildly, the ship's artificial stabilizers struggling against the sudden acceleration. The hangar floor tilted beneath them as the entire vessel lurched. Kilo's voice was frantic. It's moving. It's moving. Of course it was. The override hadn't disabled the Retribution. It had woken it up. Varesh pushed himself up, dragging Vayan toward the shuttle's ramp. The soldier was still coming, its movements unhindered by the chaos around it. But Varesh had made a choice the AI hadn't accounted for. He had broken the pattern. He reached the shuttle just as Kilos initiated launch protocols. The hangar bay doors had begun to close again, the ship correcting itself, sealing off any potential escape. They had seconds. Varesh turned, raised his weapon and fired. Not at the soldier. At the hangar controls. The explosion rippled through the chamber, sending sparks and shrapnel cascading in all directions. Emergency failsafes kicked in, and for the briefest moment, the closing bay doors hesitated. It was all the time they needed. Kilos slammed the throttle forward. The shuttle's engines howled, its frame bucking as it shot through the narrowing gap. Varesh barely had time to brace before the craft lurched into the void, the Retribution shrinking behind them. But the warship wasn't finished. Alarms blared within the shuttle as Kilos cursed. It's locking weapons. Varesh knew they had pushed too far. The ship had tolerated them as an infestation to be analyzed, but now they were something worse. They were enemies. The Retribution's external batteries powered up, ancient turrets rotating with eerie precision, targeting systems locking onto their fleeing shuttle. The warship had no intention of letting them escape. And then the final horror revealed itself. The signal. The one Varesh had triggered during the override. The one that had gone out into the void. It had been answered. Space rippled. From the darkness beyond, shapes emerged. Massive, sleek, predatory. Warships. Human warships. They had come. The retribution was not a relic. It was a beacon. A call to something greater. And now that call had been heard. Varesh could only watch as the fleet materialized, their cold, unyielding silhouettes illuminated by the glow of distant stars. Kilos whispered what they were all thinking. We were never supposed to leave. And as the first of the human vessels adjusted course, their weapons priming, their intent clear, Varesh understood.